Coming up next from the Grassy Knoll, a terrifying look into the Orwellian world of brainwashing, disinformation, and ultimately control over you.
Welcome to another segment of the Grassy Knoll on this Friday, March 12th, 2004. This is Vyzygoth. Our guest for the full 3 hours is Catherine Austin-Fitts, someone to whom we've made reference many times throughout the course of our shows. And she's with us today, and we're proud to have her. We'll introduce Catherine in a moment, but let me first remind you that the first hour of the Grassy Knoll is being brought to you in part by Shannon's Produce. Eat healthy, eat fresh. Shannon's Produce on Island Boulevard in Zephyr Hills. And by Great Thai Restaurant. If you're looking for great atmosphere, great cuisine, great service, check out Great Thai Restaurant on State Road 54 in the Lake Bernadette Plaza. Also, archives of all shows can be accessed only at VyzygothsGrassyKnoll.org. You can access recent shows through radioforall.net. You can also listen to past Grassy Knoll shows and other alternative programming on Live 365. Go to pascoradio.org and check out the schedule. We are streaming, and you can listen real time by going to kgrn.net and click on Listen Live worldwide 24/7. So if you want to listen to future shows live, remember we are on from 5 to 8 Eastern Standard Time. You may also send an instant message if you wish to ask a question or make a comment. Use this IM address, AM 1350 WDCF. And especially if you want to address a question to Catherine, and I'm sure she'll field your questions. Lastly, the views expressed on the Grassy Knoll are not necessarily those of the management, staff, or advertisers of WDCF, WZHR, and the Tan Talk Network. And now on to our guest, Catherine Austin-Fitts. And Catherine, thank you for joining us.
It's a pleasure to be on.
Don't be so sure about that yet. All right, Catherine, I got to tell you, your bio is extensive, and I studied it, and I left it in the office. Now, you have had, and continue to have, quite a great business resume built. Would you mind just going through that for us, please?
Sure. I grew up in Philadelphia and graduated from the University of Pennsylvania undergraduate after spending a year in Hong Kong studying Chinese, and then went to the Wharton Business School, where I got my MBA. I was on Wall Street for 11 years, becoming a partner and member of the board of directors of Dillon Read and Company, which is Wall Street Investment Bank, which was is now part of UBS. And in 1989, I left the firm. We sold the firm in 1986, and the non-competes came off, and we got our money out. And I went into the first Bush administration as Assistant Secretary of Housing, Federal Housing Commissioner. That's the person who runs the mortgage insurance operation and mortgage market regulation functions at that time at the Department of Housing and Urban Development. So you're the senior official for the president in housing and the regulation, the oversight and regulation of the mortgage markets. And then I left and was asked to be a governor of the Federal Reserve and declined that to start my own company. I discovered the Internet when I was in the administration. And I started an investment bank, the Hamilton Securities Group, and when I declined the governorship of the Federal Reserve, the administration asked me if I would go on the board of Sallie Mae, which is the corporation that finances student loans. So I started my own company and went on the board of Sallie Mae. And then Hamilton was very successful. We were, several years later, hired back on competitive contract to help run their loan sale program and serve as financial advisor to the FHA, again on mortgage markets. And then the company was targeted. I asked you yesterday if you'd seen the movie Enemy of the State with Will Smith. I have a friend who introduces me at conferences and says, "Who here has seen the movie Enemy of the State? This woman played Will Smith in real life."
That's a scary thought.
Yeah, it was. It was pretty scary. It was right out of the movie. So anyway, for the last 8 years I've been doing that, and that's come down. You know, Will was much faster than I was. So
on a bike, yeah.
So anyway, that's come down into a tail, and I'm engaged in litigation. I'm speaking to you from Washington, where I'm sitting in my attorney's office. I'm preparing for litigation with the federal government. And I've started a new company, Solari. I'm the president of Solari Inc., and Solari is an investment advisor and formation, and our what Solari is going to be doing as soon as I finish fisticuffing with the Department of Justice is financing communities with equity. And hopefully we'll have some time to talk about that, because I see that as being one of the principal solutions that many people need, not just in America but around the world, globally, to reverse the current trajectory of where our economy is going, which is no place good. So that's who I am. I'm an investment banker, and Solari is based in Hickory Valley, Tennessee, and which you're an Elvis fan, and you better be.
Yeah. Never met a prescription I didn't like.
You have to understand, in West Tennessee, Elvis is so beloved. Elvis just passed the Beatles as having... Elvis now has had 19 number one hits in England, and the Beatles have had 18, and we see that as a great triumph in West Tennessee. But Hickory Valley is a small cotton farming community about an hour and a half due east of Elvis's home Graceland, which is Memphis, Tennessee. So I'm about an hour and a half east of the Mississippi River and 10 miles north of the Mississippi state line. So, again, today I'm sitting in Washington dealing with the litigation. So that's my background. I'm an investment banker.
To say the least. Before we go back to the very beginning of things, so to speak, and I wanted to talk about some of the unseemly items that are involved in global economies. Who exactly is you're the plaintiff in this case, are you not?
There are three trials. Two are consolidated. What happened was 8 years ago, a snitch. You know, a lot of these things happen with private informants who get a piece of the action. Right. But my company, Hamilton Securities, was helping HUD sell $10 billion of defaulted loans. When HUD guarantees a mortgage and the mortgage defaults, they end up taking back the mortgage. And they had about $12 billion of mortgages. If you remember, during Iran-Contra, the SNL crisis, you know, we had something called the RTC. I don't know if you remember that. You're in Florida, so there's a lot of RTC. Mm-hmm. But they sold off, you know, they took in a lot of defaulted mortgages and sold them off. And so everybody kind of got rid of their defaulted mortgages except for HUD. And so we were retained to help HUD figure out what to do with this stuff. And then when they decided to sell them, to help sell them. And what had happened was, traditionally when HUD had a defaulted mortgage, they would recover 35 cents on the dollar. And then we were able to, there's a team at HUD who was able, with our help, to get that number up to about 70 to 90 cents. And then in 1997, when this enemy of the state thing happened, the loan sale program was stopped, and HUD went back to the methods that traditionally had produced 35 cents on the dollar. Essentially what that's about, bring us back to the global economy, it's what I call piratization. Okay?
Right.
And that's part of what we're going to talk about today. Now, you've heard the word privatization, right?
Right.
What is privatization?
To me, it's companies actually buying into, as far as I know, public holdings, such as they could buy utilities, water companies. How's that? Right.
Privatization, a working definition of privatization, is when a governmental function or asset is sold or outsourced to a private company. So, for example, if we decide to go to war in Iraq, and instead of the U.S. government through the State Department has outsourced the management of the Iraq prison enforcement and judiciary system to DynCorp. Okay, so that's a privatization. It's a governmental function. The government of Iraq, a piece of the government in Iraq, which if we're occupying Iraq during a war, that's a governmental function that's been outsourced to a private corporation. Okay?
Right.
That's supposed to be privatization now. Privatization is supposed to happen at market prices. So if on a competitive basis the price of doing this function was $10 million, then privatization is you hire somebody privately who does it for $10 million. Okay?
Right.
Now, let's say we had an asset like a defaulted mortgage that we wanted to privatize. The government owns it. Government doesn't want to be in the business. They want to sell it. So let's say they hold an auction and they sell it for 70 to 90% of its face amount. Okay?
Right.
That's privatization. Now, when the government turns around and goes through a process whereby they transfer it at 35% of face amount, that's what I call privatization.
Okay.
Okay, that's when the transfer of the asset happens at significantly below market prices, or the outsourcing of the function happens at significantly above market prices.
Right.
You read about Halliburton getting paid way above market for the oil in Iraq?
Right.
That's privatization.
Right.
Because they're being, they're using this privatization vehicle as a way of subsidizing large corporations and private investors.
Now, I'm not saying you want to go there, but clear me up on this if you would.
Sure.
I often think of privatization also as, for instance, what's going on today about corporations buying up water, so to speak, and for what I see later on as a move to both ration it or tighten the faucet down a bit and raise the prices.
Right. That's privatization.
Okay.
And let's talk, because we should talk about local and state privatization, because what's coming after the election is a significant movement of privatization that instead of focusing at the federal level is going to move down and really start to attack the state and local level. And what your listeners are going to be interested in is how do they protect themselves in that process?
Well, without a doubt, we had, I guess, the first shot fired across our bow with what I told you about happened Tuesday with this referendum. And it's funny because one of the companies, I guess, UBS, in fact, got its claws in down here, which I thought was very interesting, along with Citigroup and also with First Albany. So,
right.
I think we're starting to see that, and I had mentioned that to you. So by all means, the people on this county and state level, I think, would be very interested in knowing what's coming down the pike.
Okay, well, let's. How many people live in your county?
Let's see. I would say about 200,000, maybe 300,000.
200,000. Let's take the number 200,000. So let's say we have 200,000 people, and is all the water supplied by public companies or private?
There's a county water supply, and the rest who aren't on county water are either on city where it's available or on their own wells.
Okay, so since you were saying 300, let's say we have 200,000 people on county or city water, and the rest are on wells.
Right.
Okay. So now, what do you think the average monthly water bill is for these 200 people?
I'm looking at Lady Vyzygoth. She knows these things. Hold on. How much? Lady Vyzygoth says $46. You can see who's got the checkbook in this one.
Okay, so let's say, just to round off, it's $50 a month.
Okay.
Right, that's 12 months. So that's $600 a year. Okay, right. Average bill for a household, right?
Right.
So those 200,000 people, how many households is that?
Do these questions get any easier? How many households? We'll divide them by two.
Let's just make it simple. There's 100,000 households,
okay,
and each household has a monthly bill of $50 or $600 a year, right?
Right.
Okay, so we're talking about $60 million of water revenues, right?
Right.
Okay. Now, what's our guess as to the cost of supplying that water revenues? What do you think the city and county costs are? Just guess a number. I have no idea what it is.
We have no clue.
Let's say it's $50 million.
Of providing the resource.
Right. So they provide the water, the pipes, the this, the that.
Right.
It's $50 million, and $10 million gets reinvested into capital improvements and reserves. Okay? Now, let's say I'm a company, okay? And I come in and I buy the water. So the county announces it's going to privatize. Okay?
Right.
Now, and let's say the county says, well, we're going to sell the water systems since there's a $10 million cash flow coming out of it, we're going to sell it for $100 million. Okay?
All right.
Okay, bear with me.
I got you.
Okay, now, let's say this big corporation comes in and buys this for $100 million. Where are they going to get the money to buy it?
Bonds?
They might get it from bonds. In fact, they might be local bonds.
Okay.
They might get the county or the state to help them issue bonds. But it's fair to say they're going to buy this water system with other people's money.
Correct. Okay, yes.
Okay, so whether it's, I know in the prison privatizations, a lot of them were done with county and local bonds. And so, it's funny. I mean, the private corporation got the profits, but the taxpayers ended up financing the whole deal anyway.
Right.
Okay, so now let's say this company is a publicly traded company. It's got stock trading in the stock market. Okay, and let's say its stock is trading at a multiple of 20 times. What does that mean? Well, big public corporations trade in the stock market, and generally their stock value is a multiple of their profits. So, for example, if Walmart makes $1 million, I haven't looked at where their stock is trading today, but let's say their stock was trading at 20 to 30 times. For every $1 million of profits they get, the value of their company goes up $20 to $30 million. Okay? Okay, so let's say this big company moves in. It buys the water with these bonds, okay? And it takes the company and it stops, instead of taking that $10 million that it was throwing off for capital improvement, it books $10 million of profits every year. So now it owns a water company, and that, it's got $60 million of revenue, $50 million of expenses. There's $10 million of profits on this water company, and now this company's stock has gone up $200 million, right?
Okay.
Because its profits went up, and so its stock market's gone up.
Right.
Now, it paid $100 million to buy the company. Its stock went up $200, so it's got an immediate, instant capital gains of $100 million. Okay?
Right.
That's how we know there was a privatization going on.
Right.
But it gets even better. Let's say they double the price of water. Okay?
Right.
So now they have $120 million of revenues. They're going to load in their expenses from other things, so they'll make it look. But let's say they get their revenues up to $60 million. Okay?
I'm with you.
Their stock's trading at 20 times. So now, what have they gotten? They've gotten, wait a minute. Holy cow.
And the answer is?
I should have brought my calculator. No, this is amazing because they've gotten their stock market value to go up $1.2 billion.
Right.
Okay? So all they have to do is jack the prices way, way up, and they can get a huge capital gains. Now, it's important to remember, when you're dealing with the pirates don't make money the way you and I make money. You and I go to work, or we start a company, and we sell something and we get cash, right?
Right.
So we think of making money as trading our time, or, doing something that earns cash, or earn something that we can put in the bank. When you run a corporation, when you're a pirate, you don't make money from selling something.
Right.
You make money from your stock going up. Okay?
Exactly.
Okay, so if you can go to government and transfer governmental assets onto your company that run through your financial statements that increase your profit and drive your stock up, you can get what I call the pop. That's what we used to call it on Wall Street. Pop is a big increase in your stock.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, it's the multiple on your stock. So you can take that $10 million of profit or that $60 million of profit, and you can multiply it times 20 times earnings. Okay?
Yeah.
And that pop is what you get up front. So it's very possible in one of these privatization situations for the pirates to come in and literally generate $500 billion of pop for themselves up front. But that money that they've gotten up front represents the water bills everybody in that area in your county is going to have to pay for the next 30 years to justify that equity valuation.
Without any trickle down for us, huh?
None.
Excuse the pun.
None. This is called RAPE.
Yes.
And it's interesting that the way we've seen these patterns is we've seen them do it around the world in other countries.
I've had a flashback to my days in grammar school. I was very bad in math, as you are no doubt divining. And I used to get this knot in my stomach, hoping the teacher wouldn't look in my terrified eyes and say, Viz, what's the answer? And you're killing me here. This is worse than micro.
Well, work with me, because if we can figure out a way to make this fun and interesting, then we can save the planet. Do you know what I mean?
Yes, I do. Yes, I do. And I know you're an optimist, and that may sound overly so, but you do have a plan, and it can be actuated, can it not?
Absolutely, because it's so amazing. I just not that long ago, I got a call from a group of people who live in they're tenants in a HUD building, and they're dealing with a piratization. The pirates are literally, completely raking them over. And they couldn't fathom that this was really happening, and they couldn't fathom why until I explained to them the total pop available in their neighborhood. Let me try another example on you, because I live in a wonderful place that 10 years ago was full of lots of little businesses, and most of the little businesses have been run out of business.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's because, let's say you have 100 little small businesses in a place. And they have $100 million of revenue. So they have $1 million of revenues each, we'll just say. We're going to use numbers that are really simple. And let's say on their $100 million of revenues, how much money do they make profit?
I don't know.
10 million? We're just going to keep it, in really easy numbers to round. So they have $100 million of revenues. They have $10 million of profit. And then here's the question: what are their businesses worth?
I don't know.
well, let's say they're worth $10 to $50 million. Let's say they're valued at a multiple of 1 to 5 times.
All right.
Okay. And let's say a big chain supermarket that's publicly traded, like a Kmart or a Walmart. Let's use Walmart. Let's say Walmart comes in, and instead Walmart gets that $100 million of revenues and makes $10 million of profit, and now they're trading at a 20 or 30 times multiple. So instead of being worth 10 to 50 million, they're worth 200 to 300 million.
Right.
Okay. Now let me show you why. Let's say you won the lotto tomorrow. Okay, and so you won $1 million in the lotto. Would you invest that in Walmart stock, or would you invest that in the local small businesses?
Okay.
What would you do?
What? Small business.
Okay, most people would invest in Walmart. You know why?
Because it's doing well. It's a large company. They have confidence in it.
Well, because the stock is liquid. In other words, let's say I buy $1 million of Walmart stock today. I can turn around and sell it tomorrow, right?
All right, yeah.
Because it's publicly traded. It's traded on the New York Stock Exchange. It's liquid. So if I have a family emergency or something, I can sell it. Whereas if I invest in my local small businesses and then I have an emergency, I can't necessarily turn around and sell it because it's not liquid, right?
Right.
And most people want liquidity, okay? There are two reasons why a big company generally is worth more, for the same amount of profits. One is that it's liquid, but the other is, let's say the chairman of Walmart died tomorrow. What would happen the next day?
What's that?
They'd appoint another really smart guy, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right. Whereas if the guy who runs the Hickory Valley Meat Market, is disabled tomorrow,
he's in deep trouble.
Well, there may not be somebody else so quick.
Exactly.
Right. So there's no management infrastructure. And that's the reason the big corporations generally have had a much lower, what an investment banker would say, they get money for cheaper. Now, if you're trying to buy a car and you pay 3%, and I'm trying to buy the same car and I have to pay 18%, you're going to get the car, right?
Right.
Because you can pay much more at the same monthly payment than I can. So basically, a corporation can come into the neighborhood and basically they're financing in the stock market with our money. So they come into a neighborhood and they buy that neighborhood with the savings of the people in that neighborhood, yes, because the people in that neighborhood are voting with their money for the big guy. See what I mean?
I do.
So that's been what's happening, and so big corporations have been coming into my community, your community, and they've been consolidating the market share of our deposits, our purchases, our investments, our savings, into their banks and their big companies because they have a much lower cost of capital because we're betting for them in our pension funds, with our savings, everything else. Now, here's the interesting thing. Let's say that the 200,000 people in your county are spending $200 million a year at Walmart, okay? And let's say Walmart's making $20 million bucks of profits on that.
Okay.
And let's say from that $20 million, their stock is going up $400 million. How much of that $400 million to the people who live in your county, how much of that are they getting?
Zip. Yeah,
Zip,
right.
Exactly. But who controls? The customer controls, right?
Supposedly.
Right. The customer has the leverage. The customer decides who gets the purchase. Okay, now watch this. My kind of what Solari's about is helping all the small businesses in a place get together and create a venture fund through something called a Solari. That's what a Solari is. And turn around and sell stock to the community. So when the community comes and buys at those small stores, they get a piece of the action because all their purchases make their stock go up, and they generate wealth to themselves as a result of their purchases. See what I mean?
I do.
Okay. So the idea is, how can we turn this around? Because the problem in every community in America is once upon a time, all of our purchases generated equity value for ourselves and our neighbors. And now that's all being drained out. It's been drained out with the retail purchases, but what you and I are talking about is privatization is coming, and now all the other assets are about to be drained out. And what we need to figure out is, how are we going to deal with that in a way that turns it around for us? Because the last thing we need to do is give more assets away to the pirates, right?
Right. This is the Grassy Knoll, and with us is Catherine Austin Fitz, who has much to talk about through our 3 hours today. And right now we're talking about the economic viabilities, especially of local and local communities. You have been saying that this has been taking place, though, this privatization on a global level. Is that true?
Yeah. Let's talk through some examples that your listeners would know about. Let's take Iraq.
We did.
What?
Well,
we did.
We kind of took them, yeah.
We're trying. Okay, but there's, sort of the key to warfare as an economic matter is you go into a place and you spend a huge amount of money sort of destroying it, occupying it, and then you spend a huge amount of money building it up after the ownership of all the assets is switched to your team. Okay?
Agreed.
So let's talk about it. So let's say we go into Iraq and we outsource a $500 million contract to DynCorp to run enforcement, police, and judiciary. And let's say that runs, that $500 million first contract authority runs for, let's say it runs for 3 years. So there's let's say it's about $150 million a year. And let's say they make about $15 million a year on that contract. The last time I looked at their proxy, they said they valued their stock at 30 times cash flow. So let's just be conservative and say it's 20 times. So you're talking about a $300 million equity value for the award of that contract. How much do the American people get paid for that? How much do they get of that equity value created?
You mean we the people?
Right.
Nothing.
Right, exactly. So we've paid DynCorp $500 million. They've created equity value to them and their shareholders of $300 million. That's how their senior management gets paid on their stock options. And the taxpayers got absolutely nothing. And you can start to see why the pressure to raise. In my understanding, Center for Public Integrity just published a great book on the fundraising campaigns for the president. And according to them, the president has raised, I think, more money than the history of any campaign. But you start to see the nexus between government contracting, particularly the kind that can go on in a warfare situation, because then you have lots of flexibility as to what you do and how you do it. The nexus between campaign fundraising and government contracting and warfare. But that's another example of where pop is driving policy. So instead of doing privatization,
right,
we're doing piratization, and the pressure is on for the privatization to be richer and richer because it's through those outsourcing. I mean, you're basically taking pure dollars and transferring them from the public sector into private pockets in a way that makes money for you and your pals. But let's just keep going around the planet and talking about more examples. In 1998, I went to the Institute for Policy Studies here in Washington. There were 3 women, one from Peru, one from Bolivia, and one from Colombia, here to talk to Congress and the American people about the war on drugs in their countries. The same company, DynCorp, had a $600 million contract to do the war on drugs in those 3 countries, Bolivia, Peru, and Colombia. So I listened to the women talk about how the war on drugs was being used to move the peasants off of their farmland, move them into HUD-style kinds of cities that were being developed by private people, and then large multinationals and selected individuals in their country were getting control and ownership of the land at basically insider prices. In other words, they're moving people off of the land they owned, seizing that land on the pretext of the war on drugs, and then all these private guys were getting this land for cheap. Okay?
Right.
More privatization. So I said to them, who's making money on this? Explain how all the money works. And after a couple questions, they got very suspicious of me, and they said, Senorita, you say you've never been to our country, but it appears you know everything about our country. You know, they're looking at me like I was from the CIA or something.
Mm-hmm.
And they said, how do you know this? And I said, because I was Assistant Secretary of Housing, and apparently it works in your country exactly the way it works in our country.
Right.
In other words, the war on drugs was a pretext to manipulate and take control of real estate.
I gotcha.
Okay. Another example, there are a couple of wonderful books and stories between 1992 and 2000. Russia experienced a huge wave of privatization, and if you want to learn more about it, you can read Ann Williamson on the net. Greg Palast has written about not as much about Russia, but many of the Latin American countries. And what they describe is how all of these governmental assets were sold off at below market values. Okay, so Russia is a great example. There's up on my website at www.solari.com, I've got an interview that Greg Palast did to describe a lot of the deals, including some of the Enron deals in South America. Same stories. Have you ever read the story of what Enron did with the plant in India?
No.
Okay. If you're interested in the Enron story, there are a couple of good books and different things. I have an article called The Real Deal on Enron. You can link to it from my website. I've got at www.solari.com in the Learn section. But essentially, Enron did a series of privatizations, governmental contracts, governmental financing, deregulation of energy, and the most fascinating thing about the Enron story can be found on a website put together by a group of really courageous Harvard students. It's called Harvard Watch, and it's www.harvardwatch.org.
Okay.
What happened was Enron got Harvard University professors to write reports that supported governmental policy that would allow these kinds of outsourcings. And then Harvard Endowment turned around and as an investor in the situation made money trading on or with Enron. Okay? So, and what has happened was the Harvard students managed to get all the various documentations, put together the story, and launched a website that told the whole story of Enron and some of its privatizations. And they're wonderful case studies as to what Enron and Harvard were up to together.
I'm surprised they even got that out. I would think that there'd be some kind of threats to the students that they could do something like this.
I think, it's interesting. People say that you can't get these stories out, and you can, but I think what we found is there's a methodology that is required to get them out. And one of the things I'd love to, we're going to talk about today is the hot seat.
Right.
But generally, the best and the greatest successes in getting these stories out have been when a lot of groups collaborate through the Internet in very out-of-control ways, so there's no formal legal relationships.
Right.
And what happens is their stories build and corroborate over time, and so you end up with a very powerful collection of stories, but there's no way that they can really be stopped without having to be overt about it. Now, let me step back and go back to the pop. And let's talk about where the power of pirates come from. The power of pirates come from their ability to control and manipulate the money. Okay? Now, let's say we made you president of the United States tomorrow. Okay? The first thing you would discover is what everybody in America wants. What does everybody in America want?
Prosperity.
They want their check.
Right.
So they want their Social Security check, they want their government contract check, they want their farm subsidy check, they want their check, they want the, and so the second thing you would do is you would ask your Secretary of the Treasury how you were going to get the money to pay all their checks. And what would your Secretary of Treasury tell you?
What do you think, Harry?
Turn on the printing press. I don't know.
Just print it up?
Well, you don't actually, the Treasury doesn't control the printing press. There's a private bank called the New York Fed that controls the press.
That's right. We know.
Okay, so you would have to borrow more money, right?
Right.
And in fact, you would have to borrow that money from the investors who now own the companies running your accounting and information systems, because you don't control your accounting and information systems. Those are owned and controlled either by your depositories, your private banks, or by government contractors who now run all your computers. You don't essentially control your own accounting systems. Okay?
Okay.
So in fact, you would have to do whatever your creditors told you to do, wouldn't you?
That's right.
Okay, so do you have any power?
Yes. As a creditor, you mean, or
well, if we're the President of the United States and we don't have control of our information and accounting systems,
they don't have control over anything,
and we don't, and we're deficit spending. In other words, we're a little bit like a company in bankruptcy who's being run by the bank.
Okay.
Okay, so what you discover is you have very, very little power. And the problem you have as a political matter is if we were to make you president tomorrow, the only way you could say no to the creditors would be to do something that would hiccup the checks, and then the American people would get mad at you because they all want their check.
Right.
I'll tell you another story to kind of help feel this out. In the summer of 2000, I was giving a speech to a group of wonderful people called the Spiritual Frontiers Foundation International. They are people who their focus is trying to understand how they can help our society evolve spiritually. Very, very wonderful, committed people. And a friend of mine had asked me to give a speech on how the money works on organized crime. And so we were in the section of the speech that talks about narcotics trafficking. And I had just described the fact that the Department of Justice had indicated about a year earlier that total money laundering by the U.S. financial system is $500 billion to $1 trillion, and that the United States is the global leader. And we had discussed the fact that the CIA Inspector General had just issued a report indicating that the Dark Alliance, Gary Webb Dark Alliance, allegations about the CIA and the American government dealing drugs essentially were true.
Gary Webb out of was San Jose Mercury, was that?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
Is this the story also, Catherine, about the raising of the hands?
The raising of the hands?
Yeah, the people that were listening to you? All right, go ahead.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's a great one. Go ahead.
So anyway, so we're talking about, the government dealing drugs and hard narcotics into our neighborhood. So finally I said to everybody, what would happen if we stopped being the global money laundering leader. So there's a little discussion, and everybody said, well, the stock market would go down. And, in fact, we might have trouble financing the government deficit, so our checks might stop or our taxes might go up. So I said, okay, well, let's pretend there's a big red button up here on the lectern. And if you push this button, you can stop all narcotics trafficking and money laundering in America tomorrow. Who here will push the button? And out of 100 people committed to evolving our society spiritually, guess how many would push the button?
99. Oh, wait, who would push the button to stop it?
Right.
Only one.
Right.
Right.
So I said to the other 99, why would you not push the button? And they said, we don't want our mutual funds to go down, and we don't want our government checks to stop. And I said, so what you're saying is you want the Department of Justice and the CIA to continue to facilitate the marketing of hard narcotics to your children and grandchildren to keep your mutual funds up? And they said, yes, that's right. Okay, now, I think today the number of people who would push the red button is much higher. But essentially what we have, in a nutshell, is we have an economy, a current economy, and I would call it a negative return on investment economy, where all of us, not just, them, but all of us, me, you, Harry, all of us, are dependent for a check or cash flow on an activity that is either doing harm to someone or is financed with the profits of doing harm to someone.
All right, Catherine, where we left off, and before we continue, I want to say also that people can instant message us at AM 1350 WDCF if they have any questions or comments with regard to what you're telling us now. Now, the thing that you just left us off with is the fact that people are willing to know that hurtful things may go on both culturally, socially, and spiritually as long as they get the money.
Goes right back to trade and security. Your personal liberties and things for security. As long as they're happy and get fed, everything's okay.
So what do we do, Catherine?
Oh, well, there's so many things you can do. It's funny, I love your ads. We're just now planning, before I left Hickory Valley, we came up, all the group of us came up with our scheme to plant our garden.
Okay.
And I have to tell you, I think one of the most important solutions is being healthy. And that starts with eating healthy food and sourcing as much of your food locally as you possibly can. It's one of the reasons we put such a stress in Hickory Valley on having our own garden. So I'm just laughing as I'm listening to your ads because, they're very much part of the solution. I just got back about 3 months ago. I went to Cancun to speak, and it was an offshore conference that helps bring offshore healthcare and financial technology to ordinary Americans. It's a network called PQI. And I got down there, and it was amazing because the Mexicans were so healthy and alive, and it was the first time I'd been in a place for a week where there were no chemtrails. So the air was just, it was like, wow, all I could do was breathe all day long. I was like, it was wonderful. Anyway, so there are no chemtrails, and the Mexicans all look incredibly healthy, and the Americans, we all looked like we were being poisoned. We looked so unhealthy and sort of toxic. And it took a couple days for everybody to really, kind of get healthy again. So I think one of the most important things we all need to do is we really need to cleanse our minds and our bodies. But let me walk through the solutions because there are so many things we can do. It's a question of when do we get the critical mass we need to really start having it make a difference. We may vote at the polls every year or two, and that vote, as you know, in Florida may not count for much.
Uh-huh.
And that's one of the things I want to talk about when we get to the hot seat is Mel Martinez and some of the things that went on in Florida, including with Enron and the privatization of your pension plans. But we all vote every day in the marketplace with our money, and that vote gets counted. Our vote at the polls may not get counted, but our vote in the marketplace does. We deposit money in banks. We purchase goods and services. We save, we invest, and we watch media. And I can't tell people, and I can't stress enough how powerful that vote is and what an impact it has on the big banks. I mean, let's focus on the really big banks that control government finances. Let's pick two of them, Citibank and J.P. Morgan Chase.
Okay.
And those are two banks that market many, many products to retail. So individual Americans throughout my state or your state use Citibank. They deposit money in Citibank, or they use Citibank credit cards, or they buy Citibank stock or other Citibank CDs and other securities, or they use Citibank credit cards, et cetera, et cetera. So the average American has many interactions with Chase and Citibank. Here are two banks who are right at the heart of significant amount of money that has gone missing from the federal government. J.P. Morgan Chase is the lead trustee servicer at HUD. There's $59 billion missing from HUD. That can't happen unless the big depositories and trustees somehow know about it. I mean, their responsibilities are such that can't happen without them somehow directly or indirectly being involved or complicit. Why is everyone in America continuing to use and support with their votes in the marketplace these banks when these banks are directly or indirectly complicit in all their money being stolen out of the federal government? Now, as a practical matter, I must tell you, as a business executive, the hardest thing in the world for me is to turn to the chairman of a big bank and say, you can't allow these things to go on, and he know that as long as, nobody gets charged a fee on their ATM card, he can steal all the money, or all the money in the world can be stolen out of the government, and everybody will still use his credit card, still deposit in his bank. In other words, it's a zero accountability system because the citizens don't care or don't connect the dots.
Right.
So citizens generally have not connected the dots between their political and governmental freedoms and their consumer options. Okay? Mm-hmm. Because as our political freedoms and rights have diminished, our consumer options have increased. Okay? And there's been this trade-off. The minute citizens understand that think of it this, have you ever seen the movie Pirates of the Caribbean?
Also, and we'll get into this a little bit later, there's another website with which you're involved, and that is
whereisthemoney.com.
That's it, whereisthemoney.com, where they can find all about it.
whereisthemoney.org.
.org. That's it, whereisthemoney.org, and of course we're going to talk about the /hot seat, which is a certain facet of that website in which you now are more or less drawing down on a very interesting character by the name of Mel Martinez.
Right, who's running for senator in your state.
After he screwed up the election and everything, well, he didn't screw it up, he brought it over to the Republicans. Well, listen, you were talking about solutions and how people can not necessarily do harm to themselves, to others, to the environment, whatever. They can find an honest way to make things work.
Right, it's all about cleansing and healing. And the first thing you want to do is cleanse and heal yourself, your own money, your own associations, your own time. And part of that is learning about how the money works around you, but starting to shift. For example, if you've got deposits at Citibank or J.P. Morgan Chase or any of the banks who are associated with all the money that's being stolen out of the federal government, you can say, look, I'm not going to, if these guys are the pirates and they're going to steal and mismanage my money, I'm not going to put money in their bank. So if they're bad, I'm not going to reward them by voting for them in the marketplace. I'm going to withdraw my support. And I'm going to shift out to, I'm going to find a local bank which is well managed, or a credit union which is well managed, and I'm going to shift my money out of the pirate banks and into somebody who's not a pirate. It's all about shifting your support and your vote from. Let me ask you a question, because I'm a woman and you're two men, right?
Yes, so far.
Okay, honest opinion. If there's a group of men in your area in Tampa who are pirates and they're stealing huge amounts of money, and because they're pirates, they're very, very wealthy, who's going to be more attractive to the girls there, to the women?
The pirates.
The pirates or you?
That would be the pirates.
And we have pirates in our area. As a matter of fact, on a quick note, we just got suckered into a penny for Pasco County tax by pirates.
I heard about that.
By pirates that are going to get rich because of it.
And they're very attractive, too.
Yes, they are.
Right, but who do the women vote for when it comes to who do they date, who do they have intimate relationships with?
Power and money.
People with the cash.
Okay, so the pirates are responding to what the crowd votes for. Am I correct?
That is correct.
I just published an article in High Times Magazine saying, okay, ladies, you want to turn this around? Why don't we stop voting for the pirates?
High Times Magazine, Catherine.
Yes, High Times Magazine. I just wrote an article for High Times Magazine. Actually, I published it on the Internet, and they asked me to rewrite it so they could publish it in High Times.
Oh, okay.
So, but anyway, it's very interesting. I mean, if you ask the critical questions of who do we vote for with everything, with our lives, with our associations, our choice of spouse, everything, we're all voting for the pirates. I mean, what you're telling me is the women of Tampa are voting for the pirates.
Of course. I mean, let's face it, that's the old adage, isn't it, that they go for power and money and the guys go for the looks?
Well, I'm not so sure it is. I mean, I'm not so sure it has to be that way, because I think people have not connected the dots, you know, and let's go back to the hot seat. In 1998, let me tell you the history of this. I was researching a pirate extraordinaire named Pug Winokur. Do you guys know who Pug Winokur is?
Yes.
Okay. So Pug Winokur was the lead investor in DynCorp. He was chairman of the finance committee of Enron. I mean, Pug Winokur is deep in a lot of shenanigans. And at the same time, what I realized is Pug Winokur is marching around the world being honored as a socially prestigious, you know, socially acceptable person. Okay? Mm-hmm. Nice, decent, you know, so here's a person who's being honored everywhere he goes by people who say that all the stuff that his various companies are doing is wrong, right? But all this wrongdoing is not connected to Pug personally. He's not being held responsible, and it's not clear. And so I got very upset, and I remember I stood up in the office and I said, "That's it, I've had it. Pug is going to Google prison." Okay. And the lawyer next to me said, "What's Google prison?" I said, "I don't know. I think I just invented it." I said, and she said, "Well, what is it?" And I said, "Well, you know, I think what we ought to do with these folks is we ought to simply illuminate. You know, if somebody's going to be a pirate, let's make sure their children, their grandchildren, their neighbors, the folks at the PTA are clear and know what they're doing. Let them, remember the town stocks? Remember the concept of a town stock?
Oh, you mean as punishment?
Right.
Okay, yeah, sure.
I say, you know, because I'm a great believer in shunning. I think shunning is very effective. So you know, if they're going to run around and basically do all these things, you know, let's make sure their neighbors down at the country club know that, you know, that Pug is the guy who's financing the dropping of herbicides on children throughout Latin America. Let's make it intimate. Have you ever seen Michael Moore's video on Columbine?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Right. He makes it intimate. You know, he takes the guy who's got bullet holes in his back, you know, and he takes him up to the store and they, you know, tries to talk to the people selling the bullets. He makes the whole thing intimate. So the idea was, let's get this all up. Well, to make a long story short, a whole series of researchers started researching Pug and, you know, collecting up all the documents and information. A group of us made something called the Pug Winokur Data Dump, which was just a way of collecting up, you know, hundreds of hours of research so that people could go faster and faster. It was many years later, a reporter called me and he said, you know, you saved me a year. It would have taken me a year to dig all this out, and now I can find it. Because most reporters, you know, have to research and write a story in a week or less.
Or less, yes.
Right. So they can't spend a year finding and digging out, you know, a whole bunch of SEC documents. They need it to be available in 24 to 48 hours. So what happened over time is lots of researchers wrote, and blah, 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 blah. Well, it took about 3 years when somebody from Harvard called me and said, this can't all possibly be true. And I said, yeah, it is. Go check it out. As a partner of a Wall Street firm, I'm telling you this is all true. And that was 2 years before the Harvard Watch team launched their website. So it took 5 years of different people collecting research and doing the work. But what happened was we were building through the Internet a shared intelligence, and we were getting smarter and smarter about how the system worked. And so research that would have taken, in the old days, a large news agency with millions of dollars of money for an investigation was being done incrementally by thousands of volunteer researchers and small organizations through the Internet. They were collaborating, okay? So that was the first example, but there have been many others since then. One of the most successful is a website we put together after 9/11 called Unanswered Questions.
Oh, yes, definitely.
Okay?
Right.
And what we had seen the success with, using the Internet and large groups to collaborate and build tools like the timeline, which on 9/11 is, chronologies are fantastic research tools for these things. So we'd seen all of that, and a group of us who came together to do Unanswered Questions said, what we need to do is we need to learn from the experiences we've had on these big catastrophic events of trying to get to the bottom of what happened. What we need to do, since the government has paid hundreds of millions of dollars to figure out what happened and get the truth out, we need to not fall into the trap of trying to provide the answers, because we don't begin to have the professional intelligence and enforcement capabilities, and we don't begin to have the resources, but we do have the ability to ask smart questions and to link people all around the world to ask questions. And so we put Unanswered Questions together, and with tiny volunteer resources, within a month, we were getting 500,000, 500,000 hits a month. I mean, the hits were fantastic.
Can I ask you a couple of questions?
Sure.
Now, again, these just come up, and they may be on the pessimistic side, but I'm sure you can rebut them. A couple of things. One, when it comes to information, now, we all know about unansweredquestions.net. We know about Solari.com. And a host of other great sources that are out there. But so many people, Catherine, are not paying attention unless it's on the mainstream news. So how do you get to take them by the back of their hair and shove their head down a rabbit hole to let them see what's going on?
Well, you don't. I'm a great believer. Let me say it another way. If every woman in the world would only sleep with people who weren't pirates, what would happen tomorrow?
The pirates would be outbred. Is that a yes?
Well, what I'm trying to say is I'm a great believer in positive incentives.
I do know that, okay.
Okay, so the Solari vision is basically to help the people. Let's break things down. Let's take any neighborhood on the planet. 10% of the people are what I call net energy plus people. They're high energy people. They're entrepreneurs. They're givers. You guys are givers, okay?
Okay.
80% are followers, and they're busy. If you're pregnant and having a baby, you got to be a follower. You can't be a leader, okay?
Right.
Because you're doing something else. You're focused. So 80% of people are in follower mode. They eat what they kill. They're not doing any harm. Okay. Then 10% are net energy minus. They're pirates. They're big pirates, they're little pirates, but they're what I call slugs, okay?
All right.
And they're basically stealing, taking, free riding, parasiting, whatever, okay? Now, the key to successful management, whether it's of a family, a community, as business, is you put the high-energy people in charge, you get the followers following the high-energy people, and you try not to let the slugs kill you, right?
Right.
Okay. So what's been happening in America is the net energy plus people, the high-energy people, are not in charge, and they're getting drained. Okay, they're working harder and harder, and what we need to do is not scream at them to work even harder. What we need to do is we need to help them get energy. Okay, for example, let's say we started a movement where we started to persuade people incrementally that if they could shift their deposits and purchases back to the local small business, they could start to really transform things. They connect the dots between the big banks and the government. I mean, there is no government, let's be clear.
True.
So they pierce the veil. It's just like in the Pirates of the Caribbean. The pirate ship is always surrounded by the fog. That's how the pirates get away with it. You don't see them until they're upon you because it's surrounded by the fog. The fog is the White House, the Congress, the corporate media. Behind the fog is the money spigots.
Agreed.
Okay? And so let's say, we get a small group of people who start to pierce the fog, see it for what it is, and start to re-engineer the money because, let's face it, we all control how we deposit and spend our money, right?
Yes.
And that's safe. I can take my money out of Citibank, which I did, and when I realized this, and put it in Farmers and Merchants Bank in Bolivar, Tennessee, and that's safe, right?
Right.
Nobody's going to yell at me for being a paranoid conspiracy theorist because I took my money out of Citibank and put it in Farmers Merchants Bank or put it in my church credit union, right? So there's something that people can do in the normal day-to-day flow of their life, but it can start to give them energy. And let's talk about how. If I were to go and talk to all 200,000 people in your county, you know what I would find? I would find that a lot of them are not making a lot of money on their investments. They've lost money in the stock market, or they're investing their savings in a 2%
right.
CD.
CD, right.
Right? Okay. Now, in the same neighborhood, I bet I can find people who are paying 10 to 18% on their credit cards.
Exactly.
Why? Why is somebody only making 2% when next door to them their neighbor is paying 18%? Isn't that an opportunity?
How so?
Well, why not refinance my neighbor out at 10%? In other words, why do we have to ship all of our money through New York City
I see.
to have a relationship with each other?
Are you seriously saying you would do this on a personal level?
Absolutely. Absolutely. In fact, one of the reasons I'm alive is before I was targeted, I provided a lot of financing to people in my family. And so when I get hit and everybody, these guys shut off all my sources of financing, everybody in my family just started paying me back or helping me. Okay? And it's one of the reasons I'm alive today was, I invested in the people I could count on.
We're talking about helping people out on a personal level in a way that makes the money stay in the community. Is that correct?
Right, but in a way that makes money for you. In other words, the key to solutions is we have to find pathways to solve these problems which save us time and make us money. And when I say make us money, I mean create jobs for us and our friends or lowers our expenses. There are lots of different ways to make money. But the pathway is not to do something that increases our risk or requires us to feel bad or do more work. In fact, the problem is right now we're being drained. So we need to reverse that drain. We need less work. We need more money. So it's very important to find pathways that shift resources. And when I say resources, I don't just mean money. I mean time or other forms of support. We need to move resources from the bad guys to the good guys. So the good guys don't need to work harder and take more risk. They need to get more energy in the short run.
I have a question, though.
Sure.
And that is, if you move money, say, for example, from Citibank to the local credit union, you're still a victim of the overnight lending rates by the Federal Reserve Bank, which is still controlled by bankers, which still goes right back to Citibank. So how do you disconnect from those banks when in reality they still have a stranglehold on the overnight lending rate?
Well, that's true. But the first thing you need to do, all the solutions that disconnect you in that sense require local organization. And so you need to get organized locally because all economic and political power starts with place, okay? And understanding how the money works in your place and building constituencies of people who will vote together in blocks, okay? And so I think of this as something very incremental because what we're talking about is re-engineering the flow of the money. We're talking about re-engineering the financial system, and you can't do everything all together at once unless you've got 100% of the people in your place willing to do that together at once. So what I like to do is start incrementally with all those actions that people can do, that they can control individually, but they can start to build a tide that builds that organization. Now, let me give you an example, because if you go to my website, and you can click on something called forums, and between the learning section on my website and the forums, you'll see information about how to organize yourself to re-engineer the money in your place in two ways. One is Solari circles, and one is Solari. Now, think of this in terms of what you can do by yourself, and then what you can do with a small group of trusted friends, which is a Solari circle, and then what you can do with the business community in your area, and that's a Solari. So let's talk through the three different levels. Here's what you can do by yourself. The first and most important thing you can do by yourself is you can face it and you can pray, okay? It doesn't matter what your spiritual practice is, but the most important power that we all have, the most important vote we all have, is our vote with our intentions and with our spirit. My pastor used to always say, if we can face it, God can fix it. One of the frustrations I had as a government official was the fact that if everybody in America was pretending that this wasn't happening, it was impossible for me to get any support to do the right thing. And so if everybody in America will just face the extent of the corruption and organized crime and pray about it so that the people who are paid to fix it can start incrementally to fix it, that's one thing. We've gone through the voting with your money, voting with your association, voting with your intimate relationships. And so that's a whole series of other things someone can do. The third thing they can do is they can participate in the political process, and they can vote, but they can turn out to town hall meetings and do all sorts of things, including, and that's what we created the hot seat for, which we'll talk about later. So there's a whole series of things you can do by yourself. But now let's go to the next level and talk about a Solari circle. Have either of you ever been a member of an investment club?
No, not I.
No.
Do you know what an investment club is?
Is that where you all get together and you track certain stocks and such?
You pool your money, you get together, you form a partnership, you pool your money, everybody puts up a certain amount every week or month, however often you do it, and then you invest together, and traditionally you've invested in the stock market and the bond market. So it's a way for people to get together locally and then ship their money to Wall Street. Okay?
Okay.
Now, a Solari circle, grossly oversimplified, is an investment club where instead you invest locally. So it's a way to get together with people you trust. And one of the options when you do a Solari circle is you can do something called a hand. A hand is something that the immigrants use as a savings club, where you all put up you agree to a certain amount. Let's say it's $10 a week. And everybody puts up $10 a week, and every time you come together, let's say you come together once a week, one person in the group takes the full hand. Okay?
Okay.
There's no interest involved. So let's say we have 10 friends. Everybody puts up $10 every week. So there's $100 a week, and one person takes the full $100. Okay? It's kind of an enforced savings program.
All right.
And it's a way to accumulate capital. And the beauty of it, instead of having all that money sitting in the bank, it's circulating among you and the people you trust. Okay?
Okay.
Now, in investment club, one of the opportunities is to help not just people, but small businesses pay down debt. Because right now, Enron can finance with equity at a dividend cost of, almost nothing, whereas our small businesses are paying fantastic amounts for debt and even more fantastic amounts for equity. So one of the things a Solari circle can do, you said you'd invest locally in your small businesses.
Mm-hmm.
I dare say if you'd invest in local small businesses instead of, if the Enron pension fund, the Florida pension fund, had invested that $340 million it lost in Enron in small businesses in Florida, it would still have that $340 million today, right?
All right.
That would have been a better investment. So whether it's real estate, whether it's small business, whether it's helping your neighbors pay off their credit card debt, the ones that you trust, there are significant numbers of local investments that can be made through an investment club. Now, as a neighborhood starts to invest, let's say a neighborhood like my neighborhood, so we have 25,000 people in my county. Let's say we got a series of Solari circles going, and the key to a Solari circle is you got to do it with people you know and trust. Okay?
Okay.
Because what you're doing is you're coming together with people and you're helping each other learn about money and learn about how to invest money and learn about things like, well, who are the banks that are doing this? Who are the good guys and who are the bad guys? Who's the pirate? That takes organization because you need, one person can't do all of that themselves. I mean, I'm an investment banker. I've been studying money my whole life. I can't do it by myself. Nobody can do it by yourself. So let's say we get a whole bunch of Solari circles going. Well, the next thing we need is what I call a Solari, which is an investment advisor for the place that can help the small businesses finance with stock. We talked at the beginning of the show. Let's say we have 100 small businesses. They each sell 50% of their equity to a venture fund that they control through the Solari. They start a Solari, and the venture fund, think of it as like a little mutual fund for your neighborhood, turns around and sells stock to everybody who lives in the neighborhood. It's called a community offering. There's a special provision that it used to be under SEC law. So the venture fund sells non-voting shares to everyone locally, so everybody owns a share in something that's like a mutual fund, and so they all own stock in the pool, okay? And that way, when they shop at the local small business stores, their stock goes up, right?
Okay.
And that way, if something's going on and the businesses aren't, being smart about serving the customer, they can run in and because they have a vested interest. They're now not just customers, they're shareholders, and they want the local small businesses to thrive and succeed and grow wealthier because they make money, right?
Okay.
So what you do is you create a tighter learning speed. But let's say we've gotten this all going. We now have the 100 little businesses have this pool going through the Solari. They've sold stock, and that's working. Now let's talk about the opportunity. Right. Now that we're in the structure where local businesses have turned their customers into shareholders.
Right.
Think of all the opportunities. Let me give you advantage because they're infinite, but they get back to Harry's very good comment about the Fed. Why do 100 little businesses need 100 databases on all the people in that place?
They don't. They can share.
They don't. They can now that their money is pooled and their financing arrangements put them in an arrangement where if one makes money, they all make money. Because once they're financing through a common stock pool, then if I'm a small business and you two guys have small businesses, if you succeed, my stock goes up. Okay? So I make money by helping you make money. And so suddenly we got all sorts of very concrete ways of making each other money and saving each other time in the short run by collaborating in ways that we wouldn't have before. So let's say we come together, we get the smart systems guys in our neighborhood to figure out how we can share databases. And let's face it, our customers won't mind because they're our shareholders, right?
Right.
So we can have a more intimate relationship with them than we could when they weren't our shareholders. Okay, so let's say we get our systems together. Now we can afford to share smart accountants, right? How come, it's not just Enron that can be smart about lobbying or state and local government. We can be too if we're now in a cooperative kind of form where those economics, we can afford to get some pretty smart guys working for us now, right? Because we're together. Now, let's talk about consumer aggregation. When I started a data servicing company in 1995, and I went to the local telecom company, and I said, when are you going to bring fiber into this neighborhood? And this was in Washington, D.C. I was living there at the time, and they said, well, I'll tell you, the first place we're going to bring the fiber is down into 15th and K Street. Okay? So the first place the fiber is going is where all the lobbyists are. The second place it's going is to Congress. The third place it's going is to the White House and the agencies. The fourth place it's going is to the sort of suburbs where all those folks live. And then it's coming to this neighborhood in maybe, after 7 years from now. And I said, well, let me ask you something. If I could put together a consumer aggregation of 1,000 people in this neighborhood who guaranteed you a certain amount of business for the next 5 years, would you accelerate and move stuff up much faster? Would you bring the fiber in much faster? And they said, yeah, we'd consider that. Now, that's about organization. That's about consumer organization. So once you get into these kind of Solari structures, you can start to organize the businesses or the people in a neighborhood in a way where they can renegotiate their arrangements with larger corporations in a way that everybody makes money. Because right now it's not cost-effective for the corporations to do that organization. That's not a cost-effective marketing thing. And it's not, municipalities have no incentives. They don't have the equity incentives to organize these things. And that's part of why privatization is happening, because the only way a corporation can get in and make money from all of this is to basically, engineer a takeover of a lot of power into place. But if all the people in a neighborhood through their small businesses get organized in a way where they're sharing equity incentives that build alignment between citizens, consumers, and the small business people in a place, then we can start to get the pop in our place. Let me give you an example. If there's $100 million of small business equity in a neighborhood, one of two things can happen. Or let's use privatization, water, utilities, all these public services. Let's say there's $100 million of equity on the table. We can just sit here and wait for the big corporations to come in and harvest that equity, or we can do it ourselves. We can start a Solari and privatize our own prisons, privatize our own water, privatize our own utilities with us as the lead investors, and we can make a ton of money and create jobs for ourselves. Why are we doing it?
Well, that's what I was going to ask you. What are the stumbling blocks? For one, I'm saying here, putting myself in that position in this particular area, and I'm saying, where are you going to get that spirit of cooperation?
Exactly. And I'll tell you what my theory was. In 1997, we were doing our first 100. We were financing the first Solaris. And my theory then is my theory now, which is a few people do them. They make a lot of money. Everybody gets jealous. Everybody gets greedy, and they start to imitate it.
Okay.
So I was depending on greed and jealousy to spread the idea. How did we get stopped? We got stopped by the Will Smith enemy of the state thing. It was pretty scary, okay? And I think reasonably what I've spent is the last 5 years working through the different risk issues of how we could overcome those risk issues. The reality was people in America weren't going to do that as long as they continued to be able to survive the old way. Okay, so as long as the Titanic was still sinking, they didn't want to get off the Titanic and build arcs. They didn't want to run that risk. I think it's fair to say what's going to happen, if not now, but certainly after the election, is there are enough people who are really suffering economically. To give you an example, in the last 4 years, I have a member of the Solari Action Network who reconfigures the Bureau of Economic Analysis statistics, and for the last 4 years, what his statistics, or what the Bureau's statistics show, is that the average American household has income of $32,000 a year, expenses of $37,000 a year, and is spending more than approximately $5,000 more than they're taking in an income, and they're financing that by borrowing more money. They've been making money or financing themselves by buying and selling housing or refinancing their housing or credit cards. And that process, in the last 5 years, our debt, both our governmental debt and our consumer debt, has skyrocketed. And we've just about tapped out of that bubble. You've heard Greenspan talking about Freddie and Fannie Mae and the mortgage companies, possibly the mortgage GSEs being insolvent. I talk about HUD being insolvent. What that is all about is we are reaching the peak of the possible debt, and as we outsource all the business and work to Asia and other countries, our income continues to drop, our debt continues to skyrocket, and we both know that, you can't do that infinitely. at some point you can no longer carry your debt. And the rubber meets the road in what the gentleman was talking about in the show right before we came on, which is when interest rates start to go up, right. the bell will toll. So the reality is, we've reached a point where enough people are being thrown off the side of the Titanic that they're interested in building arcs because they have no choice.
I don't want to ask this out of context, but I do want to. Well, it's on my mind. Let me ask you. I don't particularly believe that the pension funds, as we know them now, are going to be there for us when we need them. Do you want to address that at all?
My understanding is the Pension Benefit Guaranty Corporation is essentially bankrupt. Most corporate pension funds are essentially guaranteed by the federal government, and the agency that's supposed to do that is not something that we can count on, in my opinion, from what I'm told. I suspect the federal, state, and local governments have been asset stripped. I mean, my guess is that if you look at the financing arrangements of the pension funds, that the pension funds in this country cannot be, whether governmental, and that includes Social Security. I think most of the assets have been stripped out over the last 5 years, and they've been privatized very quietly, but very completely.
Well, in this model that you do have, keeping the money local and such, can people invest in a certain way in their for instance, I'm in a savings and loan. I will not go into the banks that I know down here especially that are huge and have been involved in money laundering.
Right.
All right, so we're in a local savings and loan, and I'm very happy with that. The interest stinks, but, I understand that.
Right.
Now, do they play a role in a healthy community in going to your local community bank or savings and loans? Does that factor in at all?
Right. I'm a great believer in switching to, and you have to look. It's very important to make sure that you're talking about a bank that has good management and is circulating and investing locally.
Right.
So it's not enough for it to be a local bank. You want to look at their financials. You want to check the references of their management, but you want to make sure you're depositing your money in a bank that is really providing leadership in terms of building equity and business in the community. So it takes a little bit of due diligence to figure out whether or not your bank is a good one. But whether, and they're credit unions. What you want to do is research the community and credit unions, the community banks and the credit unions in your area, and look at their financials and check out the references of their management, but make sure they're providing real leadership in the community for promoting small business and building up financial literacy in your community.
Now, can something like this go on even though someone may leave the workforce more or less? Can they still have their money circulating in a situation like this that would provide them with some kind of retirement funds?
It's very important to remember what I'm talking about is something that if you do it well, you can make a lot of money, and if you do it stupidly, you can lose a lot of money.
Okay.
It's like anything else. It requires attention by either you or attention by people who are both trustworthy and competent. But the reality is all the profit that's coming out of this country is coming out of the communities and the kinds of people I'm talking about. In other words, if 73,000 neighborhoods can't trust the leaders in their own neighborhoods, then there are no solutions because that's where all the money is coming from that the pirates are stealing. So what I'm suggesting is, one of the most frustrating parts of my job is most of the people in America I talk to have no concept of how much potential equity there is in their home, their household, themselves, or their community. They don't see it. They can't, they're not a trained investment banker.
Right.
So they don't realize how much is being drained out and stolen. I looked at a prison privatization in our county that happened before I got there. I estimated that about $60 million of equity in 1 year through one trumped-up deal had gotten switched out to a private corporation when the county, with our municipal bond system, had essentially financed and banked the whole deal. We provided the contracts, we provided the financing, and the private corporation got, my estimate, more than $60 million, but it's $60 million that we could have had if we had banked the deal through a Solari that was financed, with local capital. The former chairman of the Republican Party sold his stock right after the deal went down for $17 million. I mean, you're talking about huge equity windfalls that are invisible to most people because they've never seen how the money works in their place. Let me tell you one story. When I've described very briefly the enemy of the state process I went through, one of the things our company was doing was making a software tool called Community Wizard that would allow people in communities to dial in through the web and look at the sources and uses of government money, credit, and other resources in a place. So you would have been able to dial into Community Wizard and be able to see what's the potential equity value of all my stuff in Tampa and the Tampa area. Okay, all that data, you pay your government an enormous amount of money to collect and manage that data, except you don't have access to it. If you go to the White House website, you will see a budget that reports all the money, in health care, all the money in housing, but it doesn't say here's how the money works in Tampa, here's how all the money works in Orlando, here's how all the money works in Miami. You can't see how the money works in a world contiguous to the area that you experience on an intimate basis every day. Now, why is that?
Is it lethargy on our part, or is it the fact that we can't get at the information?
Well, I built a software tool that would get you at that information.
That's the
Wizard,
and
the Department of Justice seized my company and basically ripped apart and destroyed my software systems.
That's the Wizard about which you speak, right?
Right. So, and there's a reason for that. That's an intentional. In other words, in a free market, information and money flows according to where value is created, right?
That's true.
Okay? But what's the enemy of the state process about? It's about policing markets so that selected people, the pirates, can control them. Right. So, one of the reasons I think that people in your neighborhood don't get together is, what people tell me very quietly is, I'm scared.
Right.
I don't want to have happen to me what happened to you.
Yeah, the fear factor is huge.
Yeah.
You mentioned several times during the show the privatization or piratization of the prison and jail system. Aside from the fact that people are lining pockets, are there some other issues with privatization of the jail system that you might have?
Sure. I think what you've seen over the last 20 years is you've had narcotics and the war on drugs brought in a very concerted way in places to do a couple of things at the same time. But one is to ensure the political control of those places by a relatively select group of people. I mean, I think if we look at the United States Congress, it doesn't look like the United States of America. And the war on drugs and drugs have been critical to maintaining the political control to us, basically an elite. I mean, it's been a great vehicle to prevent democracy, to manipulate democracy, and to make sure that certain people end up with no right to vote or end up in prison making money for the people,
I guess that's my point, is that when you have a privatization of a prison system, the incentive is to keep the jail system as populated as possible, which corrupts the judicial system, and additionally, you, under a corporate-run prison system, you don't have sworn officers of the law who are running the system, and therefore there are no constitutional rights, and there's absolutely nothing. It's all corporate.
Right. It's much easier to manipulate. It's much easier to manage things outside of the law if it's privatized. Because what happens in government is you get, I worked in government for 18 months, but I've worked with government a lot, and in my experience, most of the people who go to work in government really believe in the law and really believe in doing the right thing. and tend to be pretty difficult when stuff is going wrong. I mean, you get whistleblowers, you get people objecting, you get people being passive-aggressive. And so it's much harder to implement criminal enterprise with government employees than it is with corporate employees, because you have complete freedom to hire and fire, move them around, not get them to ask questions. I mean, turnover is the key to keeping control. So there's tremendous advantages to privatizing things, because it gives you much greater control and much greater freedom to do things outside the law without people even knowing that it's going on. If you want a wonderful example of that, this is not a privatization context. You should, and if you go to the Learn section of my website at www.solari.com, I have an article about the European Union lawsuit against RJR Nabisco. The European Union about a year ago filed a 200-page complaint against RJR Nabisco for money laundering with cigarettes for 2 or 3 decades, with the Russian mafia, the Colombian drug lords, the Italian mafia, and Saddam Hussein's family. The European Union brought the lawsuit on behalf of 11 sovereign nations of Europe, Sweden, Germany, France, Belgium. So you can imagine the intelligence agency capacity they have access to.
All these countries who wouldn't stand arm in arm with us on the invasion of Iraq, by the way.
So what you've got is you've got a 200-page complaint, which is more entertaining than the Tom Clancy novel,
right?
But describes a major corporation doing global money laundering on a systemic basis in huge size as a very professional business. It's an amazing document to read, but it gives you a hint of the kind of operations that may be going on when we talk about these things.
You also mentioned, and I guess time might be getting short, but one of the going back to the invasion of Iraq and privatization or piratisation, there was a time that the United States Army fed its own people.
Right.
And now, with this latest debacle going on with overcharging and whatnot, Halliburton says if they have to refund this money, do these things, they're going to be relegated now to feeding soldiers 3 meals a day of nothing but sandwiches. And I'm thinking that would have never happened with the old adage of the Army traveling on its stomach, with the Army feeding itself. And
right.
And there's something, to me, there's something wrong when the Armed Forces of the United States is not running its own self. The Veterans Administration is run by people who don't have a clue, who have never been in the military, don't have everything is outsourced there as well. With
us is Catherine Austin-Fitts. If you would like to IM a question or a comment, you can do that on the address AM 1350 WDCF. And Catherine, right there, you heard some grim news from the Communist News Network, did we not?
Major bankruptcies.
Exactly.
Right.
Now, if we can sum this up to a certain extent, could you hit some bullet points as to how Solari can work and how people could plug into something like that?
What's happening is we're in a phase where the economic and political power is being centralized, and that's only going to stop or change if we intentionally organize it to decentralize. My company, Solari, our goal is to see decentralization happen in a way that starts to incrementally shift power and money to what I consider to be the high-performance entrepreneurs in a community in a way that's wonderful for that community. Solari Circles is an investment club that focuses on financing and investing and saving locally. And it's a way of getting together with your friends. It's a social experience. It's people you trust. And start to collaborate. I always tell people when I speak, I said, don't worry about whether there is a conspiracy. You need to start one.
There you go. I like that.
So it's really a way for you to get together with, the 5, 10, 20 people you know, trust, and love, and start to conspire about how are we going to save enough money to make sure we're safe? How are we going to make sure that we have the resources to retire? How are we going to, we're on our own. The Titanic is sinking. How do we build arcs? And so a Solari Circle is an investment club. It's not a job, but it's a way to get together and figure out how to invent and create jobs and help each other with your financial problems. So that's, I'm a great believer that nobody is as smart as all of us. So a Solari Circle is an investment club, but it's an investment club that has a savings feature and is designed to, to help people figure out how to make money from saving locally. One of the things I didn't mention earlier you can do is start a community currency, because there's so many functions in a place that don't get developed because we have fiat currency. There's not enough currency floating around.
Right.
So there's an endless number of things you can do. If you get the Solari Circles going, there may be entrepreneurs who are qualified in your neighborhood, or small business people who want to get together and start a Solari. And a Solari is an investment advisor for your neighborhood who can help your neighborhood raise and aggregate capital so that you can buy out your own. I mean, if you're going to privatize everything, buy it out in the way that the people in the neighborhood get the pop. So we wouldn't have record bankruptcies on all our small businesses if everybody started a Solari and refinanced all those small businesses out with equity. What is driving a lot of those bankruptcies is people are choking on their high interest or bank debt. And so a Solari is a way to get together and get much smarter about flowing the purchases through your small businesses and financing your small businesses with your equity that save your small businesses in a way that make money for the customers in that neighborhood. So it's really about getting smart and organizing, but organizing in a way that saves time or makes money for the high-performance people in your place.
Now, the thought of a Solari is still probably to our listeners, and perhaps to a certain degree myself, somewhat amorphous. So is there a hard... If you go to www.solari.com and you click on the network forums, at the Solari Action Network forums, there's a forum called Solari Circles. And if you go into that forum, you'll start to find all the different links where there's different information on what a Solari Circle is, how to start it. Also, at the Learn section, there's a tremendous amount of information on Solaris. And you can start to link, and at the forum you can start to find all the different groups around the country who are starting to do Solari Circles and Solaris. Okay, the two last questions I had, if we are going to move away from this topic, and that is, one, do you find that the circles of people who get involved with this may be somewhat centered on a church congregation, or is that happening at all?
What you need, do you read the Bible?
Yes.
Okay. Well, do you remember the story of Gideon?
Yes.
Okay. In the story of Gideon, the angel of the Lord comes down and tells Gideon to throw the Midianites out of Israel. And Gideon says, I can't do this, I'm just a shepherd, And the Lord says, no, call for an army. So Gideon calls for an army, and the angel of the Lord comes back and he says, no. He said, you got too many people, they're not true believers. And Gideon says, well, I don't have enough people to throw the Midianites out, and you want me to get rid of people? So the Lord says, yeah, you need people who really believe. So he gets rid of them, and then the angel of the Lord comes back and says, no. He says they're not all effective. So he puts them through some tests, and basically what the angel of the Lord is saying, you need people who are trustworthy, and you need people who are competent. They got to be both. Okay?
Right.
And the key to doing any of this is to limit yourself to people who are trustworthy, ethically, and who are competent. Now, generally, what I find is you will generally find around a good church, there are plenty of bad churches, but around a good church, you will find people who have been together, know each other, and are committed to the values of being trustworthy and being competent and reliable. And so there's no doubt about it that they're, if we're going to privatize and there's going to be no government, then every town you drive in has some banks and some churches. And it doesn't take you long to figure out, well, if the banks are pirates or the big banks are pirates, maybe you need to find a good church. But what I find is every town is different. And there are these different organizations. It could be a church. It could be the Rotary. I'm a member of Rotary. It could be, every town is different. But there tend to be a couple of organizations where a lot of the ethical, competent people have organized into a group. And that is usually a critical mass to work from.
Yeah, ethical is a key word there, and that's what I think I'd be looking for.
Well, you want ethical and competent, too. I mean, if you can get a group that has different combinations of skills, you need both. It's not an either-or. It's an and-and.
Is there any place where listeners can go to your website or some other websites where this model has been implemented?
Well, we have groups now who are implementing it, and you'll see some of the information on the forum.
Is Middlebury one of them, by the way?
Middlebury is one of them. Fillmore Solari is just launching their website. There are other groups, though. I think the Solaris are going to build pretty quickly once we launch we're about to put up the first design book. So I think it's just now starting to take off because, again, we started to launch this in 1997 and then ran into the fact that the pirates were going to, wanted to steal everything. Now that they've stolen everything, my suspicion is that we'll be able to do this and take it up pretty quickly.
Also, about Enron's dealings, are you saying that HarvardWatch.org is a good place to go to educate yourself as to what they've done or are doing?
Right. I would suggest, if you're interested in Enron, I would suggest 3 sources. Okay. I would read The Real Deal on Enron. There's an Enron section on my website, and I would look at those articles, particularly The Real Deal on Enron. The second thing I would do is I would read Kevin Phillips's book called American Dynasty. It's only got a section on Enron, a small chapter, but it puts Enron in the context of the business model. Okay? So I would read that, and the other thing I would do is I would read The Hot Seat, because if you're in Florida, I mean, the rake-off of the Florida pension funds is one of the great examples. And then, of course, the other is HarvardWatch.org. The students at Harvard who really, they got Pug Winokur fired from the Harvard Corporation for his role in Enron.
Okay. Now, talking about the hot seat, we could move away toward that topic.
Okay.
Which I know that you're more than willing to speak about. You threatened me about doing the interview at all if we didn't do it about Mel. Mel. What in the world is going on in the criminal enterprise known as the state of Florida or the fiefdom of Prince Jeb?
Well, it's about a year ago, about 6 months, a year ago, we launched a group of us, a website called whereisthemoney.org. There is $3.3 trillion missing from federal accounts. And let me give you the story behind this. I was part of a group of people that got laws passed requiring audited financial statements of the federal government. And that law kicked in 1995, and so the different agencies started to report their efforts to do audited financial statements every year to the General Accounting Office and the 2 committees in the House and the Senate who were sort of that governed that process. And every year, starting in 1995, they started to come to Congress and the General Accounting Office and say, guess what? We can't produce audited financial statements. I mean, in fairness to Enron at least knew they had to cook their books. The federal government didn't even bother. Right, they just said, well, guess what? We didn't comply again. And to this date, it's now almost 9 years later, the federal government has never produced audited financial statements, not once. One of the squabbles that O'Neill had that probably got him fired related to trying to get those financial statements, and full disclosure about the full liabilities and what was going on. So, anyway, so what happened starting in 1998 is the federal government started to report in this process annually that there were significant amounts of money that were missing. It came to light in the spring of 2000. The Inspector General for HUD testified that $59 billion of undocumentable adjustments had occurred, and HUD refused to produce audited financial statements and just wasn't going to bother.
Oh, well.
$59 billion is a huge amount of money. Well, when you dug into the financial statements, it turned out the year before they were missing $17 billion. And in the next 2 years, they refuse to say what their undocumentable adjustments are. Now, under the Constitution, that's not legal. You can't just spend money, not be able to document where it went, or prove that it was a governmental purpose. That's illegal. So
what?
Well, in the same period, the Department of Justice started to report significantly more. They were missing in fiscal 99 2.3 trillion. I guess it was 1.1 trillion, and then the next year 2.3 trillion. It was back to back. So they were missing 3.4 trillion. And then the next year refused to say. And in fact, there was tremendous pressure in the summer of 2001 to find out where all this missing money was and get to the bottom of the problem. And in fact, Senator Byrd, during Rumsfeld's confirmation hearing, said, I don't know how you think you're going to get these big budget increases when there's 3.3 trillion missing.
Right.
Why should we give you more when there's a black hole in this thing? And in fact, the week before 9/11, Rumsfeld gave a press conference and was grilled about the missing money. And so we had thought during the summer of 2001 the appropriation had not come out because there was so much tension in the defense subcommittees. Bush had gotten elected, and so everybody wanted payback, but meantime the 3.3 trillion was missing. Anyway, as soon as 9/11 happened, that issue got swept under the rug again, and the big increases in defense spending happened. And so 9/11 kind of kicked the missing money issue under the rug. And it's taken many, many years for it to percolate back up. And finally, a group of us launched this website called whereisthemoney.org, which documents most of the documentation on the missing money. It takes hours, buried deep in the financial statements.
Right.
And whereisthemoney.org pulls up that documentation, and then we created a petition, and people can go and sign, and it's a way of building a list and the names of people who care about this issue. We created a Spanish version because, for several reasons. Right. One is there's so many people now.
Yep.
The Republicans are bringing in to vote Spanish-speaking Americans, number one.
Illegals.
But number two, this issue is not just American citizen issue. This is a worldwide issue because we now have nations and people around the world who are financially dependent on dollars and U.S. Treasury and U.S. agency securities. And if this operation is being essentially raped by pirates, it's hurting them too. So this is global. The victims of this piracy are global.
Yes.
And so we wanted, what we'd love to do is translate it into as many languages as possible.
I wanted to play Rocky Top in your honor, but I left the disc along with the bio at home. So I'm thinking Tennessee right now.
We love Rocky Top.
Oh yeah, that's beautiful. That's a classic, isn't it? Both the mountain and the song.
Yeah.
All right, we're going to get back into the who's behind.
Okay. Well, let me tell you. So people wanted to know, who's doing this. So the site grew. We put up frequently asked questions because they're like, how could $59 billion be missing? So all these questions. But ultimately, everybody wanted to know who's doing it. We put up a section called Who so that you could really see who in the government is in charge of making sure this can't happen. Well, let me go back and tell a story. In March of 2002, I got a call from the Hardeman County Republican Party, and they said the Republican candidate for governor, a guy named Van Hillary, who's Tennessee 4th District, which is east of Nashville, is running for governor. He's going to be here at one of the local banks, and, come on down. So I had a breakfast in Mississippi that morning. I drove back, and I went by Bolivar, which is our county seat, went in, and there were 30 of my neighbors, some of whom I know, and this guy, Van Hillary, who I've never seen before, comes in very personable, and he gives about a 20-minute presentation that's very, very excellent, basically saying, the reason you should vote for me for governor is I'm more fiscally responsible. The state has financially got problems, and I'm the guy to fix it. So he finishes up and invites our question. It's a town hall meeting in a little town. So I said, well, Congressman, I gave him the whole background and all the $3.3 trillion missing and how that's $11,000 per household for all Americans, da-da-da-da. And he said, yes, I know it's missing. And I said, well, what have you done to get it back? And he said, well, nothing. There's nothing I can do. I'm only one of 450 people. There's nothing I can do. So I left, went home, had witnesses. I did some research, and I found out he's on the budget committee. He's one of 20 people. He's not one of 450 people. So I got so angry that my Bible class at church agreed to help support me in writing a letter to him and asking him a question. So I sat down with a friend of mine who'd been on the appropriation staff, and so we asked. I sent him a list of questions that basically would inform anyone who doesn't know anything about governmental process, everything that a congressman or a staff could do to figure out, why the money was missing, what was wrong, and to get the money back. So I sent him off the letters. We sent it to all his campaign offices, all his congressional offices, and never got a response. So I sent it out to the other candidates. Then we built a list of 300 reporters covering the Tennessee election, sent it out to them. To make a long story short, then Hillary ended up losing. And my feedback is that one of the things that caused that to happen was he started to get a lot of questions about the missing money. And that helped to pull some of his political support. Now, why do I tell you that story? Because what I learned is when a lot of people in every neighborhood participate in the election process. And they go to town hall meetings, they ask questions, they circulate information. That's a process where we can all have a conversation. And what I've found is very informed people can have a huge impact. I mean, I think the group of us who did we launched a website. Somebody in London made cartoons, and the website went up in New Zealand. It really went all around the globe. So, a lot of people ended up watching. Now, what I thought was, when we did this Where's the Money website, one of the people who was listed as one of the people responsible for all the money missing was a guy named Mel Martinez, who had helped Bush win Florida in 2000. In 2000, and then was rewarded for his role in getting Bush elected by being made the Secretary of HUD. And he walked into HUD exactly right after Insight Magazine had reported this $59 billion. It was a big headline in Washington, $59 billion missing from HUD. Mel comes into HUD shortly and proceeds to do absolutely nothing.
Let me stop you just there. Tell folks that you were in HUD. Under whom did you work?
Right. I was an assistant secretary of housing under Bush, the first Bush administration. Jack Kemp was the secretary.
Now, HUD always seems to be in trouble. Kemp may have been the only one that didn't seem to be as embroiled in matters, but Cisneros and Cuomo...
Kemp was one of the dirtiest secretaries in the history of HUD.
Well, he's got a nice smile.
Oh, yeah.
All right, so there you go. Okay. I mean, is this a place, is this a department that is, famously corrupt?
No, I think the political purpose of this department is to finance the black budget.
And what do you mean by that?
Well, under the National Security Law of 1947 and the CIA Act of 1949, there are provisions under National Security Law for money to be skimmed out of the appropriations of all the different agencies and channeled into the intelligence and military budgets for what's called black budget projects.
Does HUD seem to be the favorite pipeline, though?
HUD is clearly a very important pipeline, I believe, in the black budget process. And HUD is a very important data collection point for political and economic control. You're talking about an agency that collects data on every home, every mortgage transfer, every mortgage closing, every home sale. I mean, you're talking about one of the richest databases in America about how the money and land works throughout the country. And you have taxpayers essentially funding the building and management of those databases by defense contractors.
And HUD also allows a lot of local swindlers to make money, too, don't they?
Well, the Soprano TV show did a big series where Tony Soprano's new big business was HUD fraud. And I'll tell you something, the Soprano TV show did a fantastic job of describing one of the classic examples of HUD fraud, and one of the reasons why traditionally their recovery rates are so low. And it was one of the businesses that our work was preventing.
Well, I don't see that show. I'm just amazed, though, that storyline could even get out. I'm always in the thought that if you've got something to say that's true and putting a light on someone, that you're going to have it choked off before it ever gets to the public.
Not in the case of HUD. Let's go back to the Florida Senate race. We have Mel Martinez, who helps the president get elected in Florida, and one set of the questions, if you go to www.whereisthemoney.org and you click on Hot Seat, it'll take you right to the Mel Martinez website. And the first set of questions are Mel's role. It's organized according to Mel's areas of responsibility, but the first one is questions related to the Enron shenanigans and the election shenanigans that Greg Palast has done such a great job of illuminating. The first set of questions and links make it possible for a citizen who's interested in those topics to go to a town hall meeting with Mel and start asking questions. The second set of links is about where's the $59 billion. You would have thought that Mel, as a Republican, coming in with the Democrats going out and the Democrats missing this $59 billion, you would have thought it was pretty easy for Mel to say, there's a scandal here. The Democrats have, messed stuff up, stolen money, allowed money to be, and gotten to the bottom of it. And it's interesting because the company that was attributed with a $59 billion loss, the company named AMS, Mel didn't fire him. You would have thought at a minimum he could have just fired the company. Didn't fire him, kept paying him, kept him. And in fact, the former chairman of AMS, within a reasonable period of time, ended up at Carlyle Group.
Oh, what a surprise.
What a surprise. Anyway, so there's a series of questions for Mel on all the different things that went on. We've heard recently that Greenspan is saying that Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae are insolvent. Mel was their regulator. If they're insolvent, Mel's responsible.
Right.
Where was Mel? I mean, Mel didn't seem to notice $59 billion missing. Mel didn't notice that Freddie and Fannie were going down the tubes. There are lots. It's a very rich set of questions under HUD. For example, there's a program called Hope 6, and one of the chief developers that HUD gives money to is a guy who has a felony record. And as he runs around developing these buildings, he throws all the tenants out because they have felony records.
Oh, jeez.
There's another great story about Pearlie Rucker. HUD had a big program going on with the Department of Justice where if a woman had a public housing apartment and one of her children was found to use drugs, even without her knowledge and consent, she would be evicted.
Right.
And there's a very famous story of a woman named Pearlie Rucker who HUD and the Department of Justice were evicting. Her mentally retarded daughter was found with drugs outside the home without Pearlie's knowledge or consent. They evicted Pearlie. It was the same period when Jeb's daughter, if you remember.
Yes.
And my attitude was, hey, Jeb's living in public housing. How come they're not throwing Jeb out?
Right. Oh, yes.
Right. So it has all the links on Pearlie Rucker. It's a wealth of links. Then the third section is Mel Martinez, as the Secretary of HUD, was a spokesperson for the administration as a cabinet secretary. And so it asks a series of questions related to all the jobs and small businesses that have been lost since his help on the campaign delivered the presidency to Bush. Where are the jobs? It has a series of questions of why, as we're losing jobs, so many people are being moved, through immigration into the United States to help lower, the price on the jobs that we have now.
Do you get a chance to have a break on this weekend or what?
Oh, sure. I drive to Philadelphia on the weekends and get to work on Solari on the weekends.
So you heading out of here?
Yeah, I'll drive to Philadelphia tonight.
Oh, God bless you. I'm amazed at the energy that you have and the drive that you have. But anyway, getting back to the story with Mel.
Yeah, one of the questions, one of my favorite questions under the cabinet secretary is DynCorp was awarded a sole source contract. That means no competition, and of course those are always the richest and most profitable. DynCorp was awarded a $500 million sole source contract, up to $500 million, to provide police, judiciary, and enforcement in Iraq. It was awarded to an offshore subsidiary, so they won't have to pay taxes on that.
This is DynCorp.
This is DynCorp. And it was awarded right after DynCorp settled 2 lawsuits related to their employees' activities, sex slave trafficking and engaging in pedophilia with local mafia while policing in Eastern Europe.
They're pimps. I know.
Pardon me?
They're pimps. I said that. You didn't.
There's a marvelous article by Kelly O'Meara called, I think it's called DynCorp Disgrace. All the links, the key to the hot seat is it's not just the questions, it's all the links you could ever want to corroborate and document this. Again, it gets back to the fact that to get the truth out, we don't have the resources of a big investigation news agency, but where we use the internet and we collect up links. In fact, if you're interested, one of the links is to an article I wrote called The Unanswered Questions of DynCorp that collects up hundreds of links that provide the documentation and evidence on all sorts of activities by DynCorp. But so anyway, so one of the questions I can, and this is for the listeners who like to go to town hall meetings and ask questions, but show up and ask Mel, why someone who's paying money to quiet off lawsuits against them for sex slave trafficking, is a contractor at his agency and is getting $500 million sole source contracts to provide police. I mean, remember, this is the job, this is the person who brings the rule of law.
Right.
And so why is somebody who's engaged in this being given sole source contracts? So, that's a great question to show up at a town hall meeting and ask. Anyway, so that's the third set of questions. The fourth set of questions relate to things on his campaign. One of the most important issues after jobs is Mel's candidacy teeing us up to invade Cuba? I mean, you don't have to be a rocket scientist to look at a map and know that we just invaded Haiti. Well, Haiti's between the Dominican Republic and Cuba. Now that we've locked control down of Haiti, is Cuba next? Because, let's face it, we have 2 candidates who are both Skull and Bones. If you read,
that's right.
If you read Kevin Phillips' book, you know that Skull and Bones is, the pirates want their Pirates Haven back. It's pretty simple.
They want Cuba back.
I suspect so.
It's interesting because we had, speaking at the university for which I work, the outgoing mayor, Greco, from Tampa. And I don't know what that speech was supposed to be about, but he went on this, screed about trading with Cuba. So I'm wondering, on one hand, if, is there a lot of things going on here? If they're thinking up north here that maybe we should open trade and that perhaps another faction thinks we should take it over, might we have a split here in ideology toward Cuba? I
don't know. If you do a search on Google and for Mel Martinez and you click on images, and I'd like to point out, if you do a search on Mel Martinez campaign or Mel Martinez Senate, the number 1 site you'll get is the Mel Martinez hot site, and Mel Martinez official campaign website is number 2.
Beautiful.
Well, if Solari's going to succeed, we need to have the rule of law. And the way you have the rule of law is illumination. In other words, the hot seat asks Mel questions and provides links. And it leaves it to the reader to decide what's going on. But what the hot seat can do is make it possible for the least informed citizen to relatively quickly access all the information they need to walk into a town hall meeting and hold Mel responsible for the real deal.
I have to say also that, it is very replete with the information. I mean, you have an awful lot of links on that particular site, whereisthemoney.org. And it just leads you deeper and deeper. It's really like a honeycomb of information.
Right, but let's talk about having fun, because what everybody in America needs is more fun. Let's say we have a club, we have a Solari Circle in Tampa. So we take 10 people, and everybody decides, one person's interested in the 59 billion missing, one person's interested in the sex slave trafficking, one person's interested in jobs, whatever your interest is. So we break it up, and each person reads, that portion of the hot seat, and then Mel's in town for his next town hall meeting, and the 10 people go, and we're 10 different people, and we got 10 different questions, but we've got the ammunition we need to really ask Mel the questions and hold him accountable to give a real answer.
Pardon me for being ignorant about this, but in these town hall meetings, don't they screen the questions before they...
No.
Oh, really? It's open mic. Go get them, huh?
No, I don't, I've never been to a town hall meeting with Mel, but where I come from, oh, no, in Tennessee, good luck.
but then again, that's Tennessee.
Right. Right, but I can't believe they're not going to have, that sometime in this campaign, Mel's not going to get hit with real questions.
I wonder if, though, it's going to form along partisan lines like it did with Catherine Harris, who also helped Shrub to quite a degree, and it looks like she was rewarded, of course, with a seat in Congress.
Well, but remember, the Republicans are the whole Republican speech is we're more financially responsible, you can trust us with the money. And so what are they going to say on Enron? What are they going to say? Where's the $59 billion? If we have, let me give you an example. In Hickory Valley, we figured out that our pro rata share of the 59, or all the missing money, $3.3 trillion, was $60 million. Okay, and we figured the average small business bankruptcy could be prevented by 125,000. Okay?
Right.
So let's say we're 25,000 people, so that means in your county, your share is, say, it's about $500 million. No, it's 60 times 4 is $250 million. Okay, I don't have a calculator, but $250 million by 125,000 is like
a lot of money.
God, it's like 20,000. 20,000 small business bankruptcies in your county could have been prevented with that money.
Right.
Okay, you would have, if you just count up all the missing money from the federal government, that could have prevented almost every small business, all your small business bankruptcies, and all your individual bankruptcies. It could have paid off the debt on all of them. So why? I mean, what I keep telling people is, this money is very, very relevant to you because your deficit. I go back to the statistics I was quoting. If people are short $5,000 a year per household, if you look at the statistics on taxes, that's about how much we're paying in terms of total taxes, Social Security taxes per household. So essentially every year we're missing $5,000, but we're paying $5,000 to the federal government, and that money is then going missing out the back door.
In all this, who's the policeman over this? Is it the inspectors general?
Well, if you go to whereisthemoney.org, under who, there's a list of all the responsible officials for the agency. So it's the people at the White House, the people in Congress, the people at the agencies, including the inspector generals, and you can see a list of all those people. Who's responsible for this.
Well, I see this quote in response by Gaffney. It almost seems like they made the pronouncement, but then nothing else happens.
Right. And you know why? Because there's no, the only way something's going to happen is if people go to town hall meetings and say, "Hey, Mel, where's the $59 billion? I want it back."
That's going to be a great catchphrase. "Hey, Mel, where's the money?"
Where's the money? Where's the money? That money, if that was returned, you shouldn't have any small business bankruptcies this year. Do you see what I mean? That money's real. It's our money.
Well, I really am going to have to watch this to see how much I can get out of what's going on down south where he's running. Is there
any way that you can inspire some people to go ask him, where's the money, Mel?
Well, he's running out of Miami, isn't he?
He's based in a law firm in Orlando. He just went on the board of Lazy Boys in Miami.
I have to check that out because he's not in our district and I'm not thinking about it, but I'll have to take a look at that.
Well, but he's running for Senate on your...
Yeah, that's true. That's right.
This is a statewide race, and the primary is in August. It was great to do the show. I really appreciate it.
God bless you. Honest to goodness, that is some kind of energy. Yeah, it's true. He's running for Senate, so districts don't matter. And not being a Republican or a Democrat, I kind of don't, watch all that closely. However...
Yeah, but this is a chance to have some
that's
fun.
Right. That's right.
Mel, where's the money,
Mel, where's the money, Mel? Such a deal.
I'm sure their website has an email. Email Mel. Where's the money? Go to the meeting. Have some fun.
I'll have the black copters over my house tomorrow. I know it. But it's worth it. It's worth it. But let me ask you this, too, as an aside. However you want to answer this, viscerally, I hope. I have to tell you for myself, when you get into the federal sector, and especially when you get near presidents, to me, Republicans and Democrats really are stage show for us. And it's our feeling that really the things get taken care of in the Council on Foreign Relations. Do you want to respond to that?
Well, it's funny. When after I left the administration, one of the boards I was on, the chairman of the board took me aside and he said, "You have to join the Council on Foreign Relations." He gives me the little membership book and he said, "It's time." And I said, Sam, I really just don't feel like it. He said, "You have to. If you don't do this, you're out forever."
Yeah, it's a career maker, too.
And I thought, it was funny because I thought, is Sam a conspiracy theorist? What is this? I think, here's what I think. I think there's a lot of people in the council, and most of them I think are clueless as to what's really going on. But I think the top leadership is, what I found is within the government, it's the National Security Council, and then around the New York Fed, it's the Council on Foreign Relations, but there is a governance process of the black budget money through the Exchange Stabilization Fund at the New York Fed on behalf of the Secretary of Treasury and the President. And I think you have outside, around the New York Fed, you have the Council on Foreign Relations, and then inside the government, you have the National Security Council, and then implementing for them is a whole group of law firms who work behind the protection of attorney-client privilege. And I think that more or less in a very organic way that is a very significant governance process for the management of a lot of that money and credit. So I think the executive committee and the senior hierarchy within the Council on Foreign Relations is extremely influential in a lot of key policies.
Well, not that you want to go down this road, but as we said before on this show, I find it interesting as much as you see partisan bickering taking place on the Hill and such, that some of these characters are in the Council of Foreign Relations and probably getting things done just as they wish. And when you think of all the politicians that are in there, and also members of the media such as Rather and Brokaw, I think it makes a very curious mix with regard to what they're deciding and upon whom that devolves. What do you think about that?
Well, what I discovered after I was targeted, I started to have members of the Council on Foreign Relations, call me up, take me out to lunch, drop by, and have all sorts of, sort of words of wisdom as to what I should do. And what I discovered was all these really smart, creative, talented people who I thought were their own people. They were acting, they were not acting intelligently because they were simply following orders. Somebody had said, do this, or someone had said, here's what's going on, and they believed it when it was clearly not true. So what I found was, they were swarming a little bit more like I don't know how to describe it, a crowd that wasn't thinking. It was more like a lynch mob kind of behavior, in a very much more elegant, upscale way, and there was much more follow the leader kind of behavior going on than I suspected. So. I think what you've got is you've got a group of people who believe that if they just do what they're told, they'll make money and rise. And that's unfortunate because they've lost the ability to have a good mirror. You've got a system that's not transparent and it's not being held accountable. And I hate to say it, I think they're going off the cliff.
And who are they?
Who are they? Well, that's the question. Who's in charge? And I can't tell you that I know the answer to that. What I can tell you is that to the extent that I've interacted with American leadership in my own career or in my own this enemy of the state experience, what I found is that most people in America think of themselves as so small in comparison to the whole system that they consistently go with the flow as opposed to taking responsibility for the whole. If you've ever been close or done a lot of close business with people who grow up on small islands, they're trained to see the system whole, and they're trained to associate their behavior with the whole system and to take responsibility that the world around them, that their behavior is that which would inspire the world to be the way they want. And so they take personal responsibility for the whole. And I think in America and in many of the countries in Europe, we've lost touch with seeing the whole and stopped understanding that the whole, the Buddha says, with our thoughts we invent our world. And we've stopped understanding our world whole, we've stopped seeing it whole, and we don't take responsibility to invent it whole. And that's the culture we need to get back to if we're going to transform. And it starts with where we started on the show about healing and cleansing ourselves and taking, and starting to think of America and the planet as a small island where we're personally responsible to help invent and compose the world around us.
I'm going back up to my native New Jersey in a couple of weeks, and a lot of my friends up there are kind of peripherally aware of the transformation I've gone through since I've been down here. And one of the reasons that I peeked under the curtain was because of the radio shows that I can hear here that are blocked out from, as you know, the major media markets. But when I do talk to them, and I was thinking about this as you were talking about the hope that there is in community and such, when I tell them what is going on and that they need to react, it's almost like I get this deer in the headlights look, and then eventually what I get is, well, what are you going to do about it anyway?
Well, because you need to break it down. You need to do things in a way that are safe and energizing for an individual person in the day-to-day flow of their life. And that's why I always get back to prayer. And just before we close, at the Solari Action Network is a prayer for the power of pennies. I sent it to you yesterday.
Okay. Yep.
And one thing that everybody can do is pray. Okay? And one of the things the prayer for the power of pennies is about, and I've published it, I have a column in Scoop Media, and so a prayer for the power of penny is also up at Scoop Media if you want to find it there.
Right.
It's about remembering that billions of dollars breaks down into pennies, and pennies, when they act in accordance and in unity with the laws of God, can shift billions. And so you only may have, I have my pennies, you have your pennies, but that's an honest vote, and we can vote our pennies.
Well, it also goes with the idea also that it's one step at a time, and you can make a difference, one person, but you have to go out and make a difference. And you can't be worried about your success rate. I do what I can do because I cannot sit back and watch this any longer and live without, daily agita.
Right, but I believe, I go back. If we can face it, God can fix it. This problem belongs to God, and my problem is to do the piece He asks me to do. And so I just worry about, as far as I'm concerned, I have a boss, I have a governor, he governs, and I just say, okay, boss, what do I do today to make you happy? I do my part, I pray about the rest. My intention is we transform, we turn it around. But I only get one vote. There's 6 billion people on this planet. I only get one vote, and that's as it should be. I shouldn't have dictatorial vote to vote, for 6 billion other people. We have to compose and invent this together.
So, you do grounding when you talk about this is the Lord's battle as well. And I'm thinking to myself, so when I go back up to Jersey, it's probably not a good idea to grab them by the back of the neck and stick their head down a rabbit hole.
No. In other words, listen, I'm a woman, okay? I like to incentivize people with positive incentives.
Okay.
Okay, so we need to think in terms of what can a person do that is... I drive a lot. I drive from Tennessee to Washington. I can pray while I'm driving. I can pray while I clean house. I can pray while I'm in the shower. Okay?
Right.
So I can do that. I can transact. A couple of years ago, I shifted all my money out of, big banks, big companies into small and local, can I tell you the quality of my life improved in ways I cannot describe. I am so much happier. First of all, I get much better banking services and much better services. But I buy and shop with people I love and trust. It's wonderful. There's something magical that happens.